It's my pleasure to introduce Richie Enterberger. I actually had a class from him at Santa Clara University these many years ago, probably 5, maybe even 6 years ago. He's really in demand with all the programs, and I'm very happy that he is here with us this session. He is the author of numerous rock history books, including titles on the Beatles, The Who, Bob Marley, Fleetwood Mac, and Velvet Underground. His book, The Unreleased Beatles, Music and Film, won a 2007 Association of Recorded Sound Collections Award for Excellence in Historical Recorded Sound Research. For the past 10 years, he's taught non-credit community education courses on rock and soul music history at several Bay Area colleges. So welcome, Richie.
Thank you, Evelyn. And it's great to finally be teaching my first class at Oakmont. Some of you might know that I was scheduled to teach a year and a half ago, right before the shutdown. And this will be one of my first in-person classes. I've been teaching on Zoom for the past year and a half or so. Let's talk about the course that I'm going to teach at Oakmont. It's on the Beatles, and I have some audiovisual material to share with you. I use a lot of audiovisual material in my classes. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way. The Beatles, the greatest rock group of all time, although they did break up a half century ago. We're not getting the bottom here, but I'll read it off for you. Ah, there we go. Thank you. So just as a reminder, we will be meeting on Thursday afternoons, starting in about a couple of weeks. Here you see the Beatles in various phases of their career, 1962 to 1969, shortly after they broke up. And a great thing about teaching the Beatles, the story of the Beatles, it's not just the great music, but the amazing changes that they went through in a very short period of time. For instance, you see them here when they started out and Ringo Starr, the drummer, was not even in the group, and they had a different bass player as well. This is a preview, so I want to give you an actual preview of some of the actual audiovisual material that I show of the Beatles in action. Our first clip is the Beatles in 1962. Then I'll play another clip where they're going to look and sound much different.
Kevin, we proudly present the Beatles.
The Beatles in the Cavern Club in Liverpool, the first time they were filmed, 1962. That's only a few days after Ringo Starr joined the group. Compare that to this clip, which is only from about 6 years later, and see how different they look. Is that the same group? Yes, indeed it is. And the course is really the story of how did these 4 guys change so much in just about a half a dozen years. And really, I think it's no exaggeration, how did they change the world? And very much, I think, for the better. In the course, we will be going through their career from when they started and when Ringo Starr joined the group in the Cavern Club in August 1962, then their rise to fame in the United Kingdom, and then, of course, in the United States. I'm sure that some of you, at least in the crowd, remember seeing the Beatles' first appearance in the United States on the Ed Sullivan Show. But then the music did not stop for the rest of the 1960s, and the Beatles' unpredictable evolution kept rolling on, really literally, not just album after album, but month by month, they broke musical ground and also stylistic ground in their image constantly. I also, in my course, play some audio clips of the Beatles, in addition to many film clips. Some of them are songs that even if you have a complete Beatles collection, you might well never have heard before. And I have one example to play for you now. I'll show a few slides as it's playing.
Each time I look into your eyes, I see that there heaven lies. And as I look, I see the love of the love. Someday they'll see that from the start, my place has been deep in your heart. And in your heart, I see the love of the love. Though I've said it all before, I will say it more and more. Now that I'm really sure you love me, and I know that from today I'll see it in the way that you look at me and say, "Ah, you love me."
So how many of you have heard that song before? I'm just curious. We do have a dedicated Beatles fan here. Oh, by Cilla Black, but not by the Beatles. Yes, it is, but that's not an official record. For those of you at home, we had someone live who said, is that on their Decca Audition Tapes album? That's from their audition for Decca Records. I don't just play rare songs. They illustrate some interesting things, I think, about the Beatles' career. One is Paul McCartney is the singer there. He sounds real nervous. They were auditioning for a record contract. And also, it sounds like he's still imitating Elvis Presley with his vocals. Your quiz question is, did they pass that audition? No, they did not pass that audition. My feeling is that's the best break they ever got. Why? You'll have to take the course to find out. Going back to a little bit more of Beatles history, let's play one more. This is only the second of two audio clips I'll be playing that also illustrates something about the Beatles' work. You'll all recognize this song, but you might never have heard this recording before.
Try to see it my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can't go on? While you see it your way, run a risk of knowing that our love may soon be gone. We can work it out. We can work it out. Think of what you're saying. You can get it wrong and still you think that it's alright. Think of what I'm saying. We can work.
And that's all there is of that tape, but it's something that helps, I feel, illustrate how the Beatles worked on their songs. In the course, we just talk about their records, but really their methods. Plenty of film clips spanning the Beatles' entire career. We saw these two in our preview. But in addition to seeing them in action, I also discussed how they recorded in the studio and made so many innovations which really reverberate more than half a century later in the way not just rock music, but all music is recorded. The fashion of the Beatles, very influential, but as unpredictable, I think, as their music, constantly changing, influencing youth around the world. This is just 4 years later in their psychedelic era. You see how much they changed in only 4 years. The Beatles as songwriters. I'll just give you a brief story about this song on the left by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, the main Beatles songwriting team. They wrote it for the Rolling Stones. They did their own version too. The Rolling Stones weren't writing songs at that time. And when they presented the song to the Rolling Stones said, we want to do that. And John and Paul said, we're not finished yet. And they went in another room where the Stones were rehearsing and finished the song in 10 minutes. That's how prolific they were. One of many stories I can discuss about the Beatles' songwriting. I'll also be talking about George Harrison's songwriting. He developed a little bit later, but he also wrote great material. We'll be covering all aspects of the Beatles' career. It's emphasizing their work as a group, not their solo material, although I talk about that a little bit at the end of the course. And you see so many of the great songs that the Beatles did and great records, great albums that they did from when they started making records in 1962 until when they ended in 1969. A reminder that the class is on Thursdays, and let's leave the last word to the Beatles themselves about whether you should take this class or not. This is how the Beatles feel about that. But let's see the Beatles themselves with words that, in the most basic but enthusiastic terms, tell us what they think students should do half a century later after they broke up about appreciating the Beatles' music. Of course, one of their great early singles, She Loves You. I hope to see some of you at my Beatles course starting Thursday afternoons, September 16th. And thank you, Oakmont Ollie. I'm sorry? Oh, and a reminder, it's at East Rec. It won't be in this room, at East Rec, pretty close by. Thanks, and it's time to have our next speaker, our next course that's being offered at Ollie with a friend of mine.
And next, we have Mick Chandler. Many of you have taken courses from him before, and so we know how popular he is here at Oakmont. And Mick has been a student and instructor of early American studies for over 50 years. He currently teaches at several Bay Area lifelong learning programs, has taught here before, and his primary interests include the Revolutionary and Civil War eras. Mick is a member of several scholarly organizations, including the Society for American Baseball Research. And I think you've heard him talk about baseball here. It's my pleasure to reintroduce Mick Chandler.
Well, thank you everyone for inviting me back to participate in your program here at Oakmont. I've missed you all. It's been a long time since I've been able to teach here, and it's really, really good to be back. And I want to express my deep appreciation, particularly to Douglas Garrison, for initiating the return here. And I'm looking forward to my class, which will be on Monday afternoon, starting October 3rd. It's a little different starting time than Richie's. I'm going on a trip, God willing and COVID allowing, during the second half of September. So I'll be back and we'll be starting my class on October the 3rd. My class is entitled Before the Storm, America from 1815 to 1850. A little word of explanation about the title. When I was preparing this course, which was during the first summer of COVID last year, I was searching for a kind of a gripping title that I think exemplifies the importance of this period. And the storm, of course, refers to the Civil War. That comes along in 1861. So this period deals with the events prior to the Civil War. It's my judgment and the feeling of most historians, I think, that Civil War became unavoidable after the year 1850. Which will explain what we mean by that statement in due course throughout our 6 weeks together. But up until 1850, it looked like it was quite possible that the country was going to make it through in one piece without disintegrating under the pressures of slavery. And so that's what I chose to be my ending point in the course, was when it became obvious that we weren't going to be able to work out these differences in a political or in a civil fashion, that it was going to require a force of arms to settle the slavery controversy in America. So that explains the ending date. The beginning, 1815, might be a little bit more, a little bit less familiar perhaps to a lot of us, because what happened in 1815 that would make it a logical starting point for a course? 1815 marks the end of the war between Britain and America that's called, in America at least, it's called the War of 1812. And it lasted for about 2.5 years. We barely made it through that war in one piece. I mean, the nation's capital was burned to the ground by British troops. It was a very, very ugly and very dangerous, perilous period for America. But when we emerged from that war, it was clear that we were going to survive as a nation. England would have thoroughly enjoyed squishing us, I think, during that war, but they had other fish to fry, namely Napoleon. They were fighting an endless world war at the same time they were fighting us. So as a consequence, the War of 1812 to the British was more or less a sideshow. But for us, our national survival was on the line. And so when we emerged from that war intact, it meant a remarkable turning point in our nation's destiny. We became confident as a people that we were going to become, in due course of time, a world power. And that's really what this course is all about. How did we go from being a third world developing nation, really, at the time in 1815, to a major world power by 1850 at the end of our course? In just 35 years, less than 2 generations, we go from being a very poor, underdeveloped country where the standard of living was remarkably primitive still for most Americans. Most Americans in 1815 were still living in one-room cabins. They were eating with wooden implements, usually off of a rough wood table in their kitchen. And it probably wasn't even a kitchen the way we think of it. It would have just been a table and some chairs with no backs set up that the family would gather around the soup pot and eat with either a wooden spoon or at most a pewter spoon, and oftentimes just dipping a bowl kind of out of the communal soup pot. That was the way we lived. Most farmers in 1815 were still operating on a semi-subsistence level where they were growing crops primarily to feed their families, as well as trying to enter the world marketplace. But we were so limited in our capacity to really become an economic power in 1815 that it kind of boggles the mind to think that in just 35 years, we had emerged into a nation that the powers of Europe were going to have to take cognizance of and treat us differently than they had before. So that's going to be kind of our theme in the course, is how do we go from such a limited and not very promising future in 1815 up to 1850, when it appeared now that we had become this fully established, recognized world power. And then only to see in the next decade, which we won't be going into in this course, to see the whole thing fall apart. It's a great tragedy in many ways because things look so promising for that 35-year period of time. The first slide that kind of illustrates the subject matter for week 1 of the course shows a man reading a newspaper while several of his friends are gathered around to listen to him read the news. This was a painting that was done in the 19th century. It's obviously been enhanced using computer technology to kind of bring it up to date. But it's a man reading the news from the Mexican War, which takes place right toward the end of our period. The Mexican War happens from 1846 to 1848. And the consequence of the Mexican War was that we doubled in size. And that was a huge part of the guarantee that we were going to survive. Once we became a truly continental power, which we did as a result of breaking off about half of Mexico and attaching it to America, there was no question that we were going to be a permanent player on the big stage of history. And so this man is reading the reports of the battles taking place thousands of miles away in Mexico, what many people consider to be a very unjust and wicked war. The wicked war was a term that was used by Ulysses S. Grant the future hero of the Civil War for the Union Army, as well as the president after Andrew Johnson. He succeeded Johnson in 1868. Grant served in the Mexican War, but he did not like it. He did not think it was morally justifiable to essentially shake down a poor, backward nation living to the south of us, just because, as Grant felt, we wanted the land we're sitting on today. We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the Mexican War. The whole point, really, of the Mexican War, as we'll see in week 4 of our course, the whole point of the war was to get San Francisco. Essentially, that was the goal, because President Polk realized San Francisco was the gateway to the Pacific. Whoever controls San Francisco controls the entire West Coast of what was going to be America, from all the way up to the present border between Washington and Canada down to Tijuana. So that war is going to leave a lasting impact on this country. The fact that we're here today illustrates that, but it also helped to lay the foundation for the Civil War, as we'll see in the course. Because, of course, when we brought in all that land, the question immediately became, what do we do with that land? Is it going to be free land, open to settlers, raising cattle, beef, and so forth? Or is it going to be slave country? And is all of the West going to be turned over to the Cotton Kingdom? Well, that was going to trigger a controversy that wasn't going to be settled until the shooting stopped. Sorry, talking like this with this mask on is a little bit asphyxiating, so I'm doing my best. I hope you can all hear me. Do you think I could just, if I could lower, yeah, I'll stay away. Great. Ah, thank you. Okay. I could even put on my glasses now so I can see you again. Week 2 of the course is going to be devoted to probably the single most important historical personage that we'll be covering in this course. And that's Andrew Jackson, the President of the United States, 2 terms from 1828 to 1836. He revolutionizes politics in America. He becomes the first populist president in our country's history. Prior to Andrew Jackson, all of the presidents from George Washington up through Jackson's predecessor, John Quincy Adams, had been either Virginia-born or New England-born elites. Jefferson, Madison, Washington himself, of course, James Monroe, and then the 2 Adamses. These were people that were quasi-aristocrats, or in some cases, full-blown aristocrats like Jefferson. And along comes Andrew Jackson and shatters that mold, because he is an uneducated backwoodsman from the West, and he's going to rewrite the way presidential politics works in America. And I think he's a very important figure for so many reasons, not the least of which is our most recent president prior to Biden, President Trump, idolized Andrew Jackson and had a bust of Jackson always on his desk in the Oval Office. So we'll try to see why there are some parallels in a way between Andy Jackson and President Trump. I won't overwork the political angle and try to make it sound like this is a modern day exact parallel. But it is significant, I think, that there are so many similarities between the 2 men. So Jackson is going to make it possible for anyone in America to become president. Prior to that time, you really had to have an education, you had to have the political infrastructure in place that would result in kind of a natural rising of people like Thomas Jefferson or James Madison to the top of the heap. Andy Jackson could barely read or write, and yet he becomes president. His predecessor, John Quincy Adams, who had absolute contempt for Jackson, once said of Jackson that I would be surprised if he can do much more than write his own name. And that was a little bit of an exaggeration, because Adams certainly hated Jackson and wanted to say the most mean and nasty things he could possibly say about him. But he wasn't too far off the mark either. But nonetheless, he was a remarkably successful president in many regards, and kind of set the template for what charted the direction for the country for the next 20, 25 years or so. So he will be the topic of week 2. By the way, before I leave this slide, this is a statue, of course, of Andrew Jackson in Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. Perhaps many of you have seen it, very close to the White House. And it's significant, I think, for our purposes, that Jackson, when he is first elected and comes to Washington in 1829 to be sworn in, he arrives on horseback, which is naturally the way everybody had arrived to take the oath of office prior to Andrew Jackson. But when he leaves office in 1837, he doesn't ride a horse away from the White House. He takes the railroad. And that's going to be a very significant marker of how rapidly things are changing in this country, because it's during that period that the railroad starts to put out its tentacles into all corners of the nation and binds us really into one national unity. As a result of the railroad and other technological developments at the time, America becomes a unified political and cultural entity, really for the first time in our history. The telegraph comes along pretty much right at the end of our story, but the railroad is in effect and is exerting its influence very, very early on in our story. The first railroad was developed in the 1820s. So, Andrew Jackson, week 2. Week 3, we're going to be talking about probably the second most important political figure during this time span. And he's a figure that most of us don't know much about, unfortunately, because I think he was a very talented and capable politician. He never became president, though. Henry Clay was a senator from Kentucky. He tried to become president 3 times and lost all 3 times. Bad luck, bad timing, and for reasons that we'll see here, he was a compromiser. That was the nickname that the press gave to Henry Clay, the great compromiser. Compromisers get a lot of things done in politics. Unfortunately, they become, by the very nature of compromises, they have to give away a lot to get their deals accomplished. And the natural result of that is you wind up disappointing a lot of people. That's the nature of compromises. Nobody's fully happy with a compromise, but it was Clay's feeling that if I can give you a half a loaf and you can give me a half a loaf, maybe we can keep this country together. I think it would be fair to say that Henry Clay's mission in life was to promote American nationalism, to keep us unified as a people, to keep Northerners and Southerners and Westerners welded together in this rather, at that time, precarious alliance between the 3 major sections of the country and enable us to survive in one piece. And it was Clay's belief, and I think he was absolutely right, and certainly Abraham Lincoln thought Henry Clay was right. Henry Clay was Abraham Lincoln's political hero. As a young man growing up, he referred to Clay as my beau ideal of a statesman, my prime example, my model of a statesman. And it was his thinking that if we can unify the country economically, we're going to stick together. If we can make Western farmers and New York City merchants and Southern cotton planters realize that we all have a stake in keeping this country together, then we can survive. And the way we can do that is by knitting the country together with an infrastructure, roads, railroads, bridges, anything that makes it possible for people to communicate more effectively and to transport and sell their goods to one another more efficiently. That's going to be the key glue that will keep us together as a nation. And he did his darndest. And we'll see during the course of his long and incredibly illustrious career, he is going to be the key player in 3 major groundbreaking compromises that keep us together as a people at a time when we could have blown apart. We could have been at each other's throats long before the Civil War ever erupted if it weren't for Henry Clay. Yeah, about time? Okay. Real quickly, we're going to be looking at James Polk and how he finagled the war with Mexico in such a way that we could break off so much land from our southern neighbor and attach it to the United States. He's often underrated. I think we're going to see he's a remarkably important character. We're going to look at the abolitionist movement that starts at this time, focusing particularly on Black abolitionist leaders, Frederick Douglass on the left-hand corner of your screen, Harriet Tubman in the lower center portion, and then in the far right, Sojourner Truth. We'll talk about why I'm focusing on those people when we meet in week 5. And then the last week of the course, we're going to be talking about the intellectuals who were so important in this period. Henry David Thoreau, depicted on the left of your screen there, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. So I think there's going to be plenty to keep us occupied for 6 weeks. I hope to see as many of you as possible. I think this is such an important period, and I hope that by the end of our 6 weeks together, you'll agree with me. So thank you once again for having me back, okay?
Oh, it is on. Okay, thank you to the presenters, and I hope all of you have been energized, enthused, and ready to sign up. We will now hold the raffle. We have decided we're going to give away 2 free classes instead of just 1. And after that, as you leave, there's bags of goodies on the back table. And if some of you feel inclined to take 2, feel free to do so. We had no idea how many people would actually show up for preview now that we have the COVID in our lives. So yeah. We will have each one of the instructors pull out 1 ticket. Okay, the first winner is 680-9452. Okay. And if you've already registered for a class, you can get a refund, or you can keep the credit for winter or fall. Richie. $680-9479. Kathy. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming, and we hope to see you. Oh, one note, on some of the publicity, the early one, Mick's last class says it's Wednesday, but it says the 4th. It's actually Wednesday, the 3rd of November.